Like the gang and I sort of were cool at that point. And so as a result, I became trusted amongst them and learned how to mediate between them. And so it was about sort of how do we all exist in this space and survive and go through the programs together, right?
I want to welcome everyone to the last podcast of season 1. And this podcast is going to be a very special one because today we have 3 guests, all members of the Forgiveness International Board. And for those of you who don't know what Forgiveness International is, it's a nonprofit organization whose purpose is to promote the practice of interpersonal forgiveness. And part of Forgiveness International's work is to promote the methodology developed by Leonel Nevadis called ESPERE, or the Schools of Forgiveness and Reconciliation. And so all 3 of our guests have been involved in the teaching of ESPERE, and they are here today to share some of their stories about people they've worked with and how working with others have changed their lives. So I'd like to begin by introducing Leocadia Montero-Hainley, who is a psychotherapist and consultant specializing in conflict resolution, trauma processing, and restorative justice through restorative circles. She also gives a lot of presentations and workshops that promote healing and trust. So welcome, Leo.
Thank you, Eileen. I'm so glad to be here.
It's really exciting to have you. And our next guest is Rodney Peterson, who served as the executive director of the Boston Theological Institute and the Consortium of Theological Schools in the greater Boston area. Rodney is now running workshops on forgiveness and reconciliation with Boston's Cooperative Metropolitan Ministries. And presently, he is visiting scholar at Duke University Divinity School. So welcome, Rodney.
Thank you. It's exciting to share in this work with you.
And last but not least, I'd like to introduce Dan Carman, who is the director of the Cooperative Metropolitan Ministries, which is Boston's oldest interfaith social action network. And he's also now the vice chair of Forgiveness International. So welcome, Dan.
Cheers, mates.
I want to welcome all of you. And since this podcast is about the practice of forgiveness and the ESPERE program, I wonder if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about how you got interested in forgiveness and how you got involved in the ESPERE program and who are you working with. So maybe we'll start with Leo, because Leo, you come from a very interesting background, beginning as a lawyer and now doing incredible work as a psychotherapist and consultant in forgiveness.
I started as a lawyer. As an adolescent, I grew up with parents that had a lot of conflict. And as a kid, I didn't know how to intervene. I didn't know what to do. And so I just noticed that I saw my parents disappointed with each other quite often. I saw my mother sad quite often. I didn't know what to do. But in my mind, in the back of my mind, as an adolescent, I was thinking when I grew up and go to college, I want to be a lawyer to help, eliminate social conflicts. And I went to law school in my country, the Dominican Republic. And then I graduated and I worked with private law for a little bit. And then I was appointed a prosecutor. And I worked as a prosecutor for over 2 years. And what I realized was that my interest in working with family grew, but my interest in being a lawyer, being a prosecutor decreased. And the reason was that prosecuting people, ordering arrests, sending people to jail, for most people, it doesn't change behaviors. it doesn't help people much in regards to like having the space to identify and name the situations that made them sad, the situations that make it hard for them to interact with other people. And that's why after I moved here, I wanted to explore the area of human behavior. I was working with organizations that provide services for domestic violence survivors. So I did a lot of work with domestic violence survivors. And then I decided to pursue a master in psychology. I was working, doing part of my practicum with an organization, a nonprofit called Adelante Mujeres. And the ED or the organization came across the ESPERE program in 2009. And we brought some people from Brazil that were working on the ESPERE program. And they trained us, and we just fell in love with the program. We saw it as a very interesting tool to use with the adult program, adult education program in Adelante Mujeres. So then we implemented it as a pilot project. It was very successful. And then we continued doing it. I worked there with the program for over 7 years. And then I left the organization almost 10 years ago. But after that, I continued deepening my understanding on the areas of forgiveness and reconciliation and restorative justice. With it's called promoting healthy interactions. And I can explain later about why the name interactions and not relationships, and because they're connected. But yeah, that's how I got into the ESPERE program and then got into promoting healthy interactions program. The ESPERE program from Colombia and the popular education methodology became the foundations for my work.
And that's just a wonderful story. So thank you for that. And talking about forgiveness and how it can affect the community, Dan, I remember you sharing with me how you were bullied in school. And because of that, you began to be a mediator working with gangs, and how that became a very important factor in your life, which led you to working with groups, I think, and understanding the importance of education for kids. I wonder if you'd share a little bit of your story.
So I grew up in the DC metropolitan area that, as we know, still experiencing some interesting things going on in that city in multiple capacities. But yes, from a young age, I was grew up in a good family, good home. But the community, as you can probably guess, that though my family are like DC association types, and as we're like most of the neighborhood, we were public schooled in Fairfax County Public Schools. And so the population wise is very diverse. As you can probably guess, you have people that are in poorer neighborhoods, and you have the wealthier families, and then you have like international families coming in from different, delegations and the like, enrolling their children in schools. But so within our school, though we had advanced placement and international baccalaureate, the IB program, we also had gang violence in our school. And so we had both MS-13 present, as well as Southeast DC and H-Town as well. And then of course you had sort of some of the white gangs as well in surrounding populations. But as a result, you might imagine that is a hard place to navigate. And so, yeah, no, I was basically from a young age, out of my own defense, had to learn how to fight. And so I got trained basically by MS-13 in Southeast and in fighting and surviving, as well as, doing well in school. And so I remember this one time as I got older, one of the kids who were teenagers at this point, or middle-aged, his father had died, but then I gave a kind of nod to him out of respect, and he nodded back, right? And so you had that sort of connection, even with our past, right? Like the gang and I sort of were cool at that point. And so as a result, I became trusted amongst them and learned how to mediate between them and knew of different deals going or fortunately different hits going on sometimes after the fact. And so it was about sort of how do we all exist in this space and survive and go through the programs together, right? As we then go on to our workplace or college experience, right, after the fact. So as I left, basically got involved within English and literature and classics and film and whatnot. But I was always interested in mediation and religion and conflict transformation and forgiveness and reconciliation. And so that was also a big part of my studies, particularly as I got into graduate school and met Rodney, took me under his wing. And by that time, he was bringing the ESPERE curriculum to the Boston area to deal with the gang situation. So at that time, mini story, right? We originally got community leaders together to do this program, and as well as minority police officers were involved. But then, as we kept doing them in community centers and then congregations, teachers eventually began to show up, and they were saying, "Yeah, no, this is definitely in our high schools." And then another generation goes by, and actually, this is in our middle schools. Oh, wait, it's in our elementary schools. Oh no, we're actually seeing this in preschool and kindergarten. That they're learning within the home what their parents do or what their brothers and sisters are doing. And so in terms of early childhood development, I think we can all understand what's going on in that play here. And so with that, we began to shift within our organization to try to get into the Boston public schools, which we were successful in, and we saw it does actually help to reach children at a young age with this kind of thoughts on, can we forgive someone stole my whatever or hit me in class or, a grievance that happens, right? Like if you can catch it early and help to them to sort of emotionally capture this, then we can create change. That was basically how I got into the work. And yeah, no, it's also thanks to Rodney and his legacy in this capacity.
Wow. Half laughing because you're one of these really beautiful, gentle souls, and yet you're working with some of the hardest groups, gangs in this. And here again, just illustrating what really political forgiveness is. And it starts with the individual, and it's got to start early in schools when kids are young. So instead of anger becoming their default, maybe thinking about forgiveness becomes their default. So thank you for that. And now we go to Rodney, Rodney, when I first heard about you, which was, I don't know, maybe 30 years ago, a long time ago, I read your book on forgiveness and reconciliation, which you edited. And for those that don't know the book, it's a great book to get. And in there, in the chapters, there's many different stories of people who have worked in Rwanda, in Mozambique, in Northern Ireland. And so I'm wondering if, Rodney, you can share a little bit about your work in Bosnia and what people taught you about forgiveness and how forgiveness had an impact on their lives, people who have been affected by war.
Sure, I'd be glad to do so. But I'm going to preface my remarks by noting how I got involved in this work. It was really through the Harvard conference on forgiveness and reconciliation, which featured Desmond Tutu and his sharing about apartheid. That gave me courage to bring teaching about forgiveness and reconciliation into my classes. I was then teaching at Boston University School of Theology, as well as on the schools in the greater Boston area. One of the things that I did was to create over 26 workshops around the world looking at conflict and religion. And when we went to the former Yugoslavia, to Bosnia in particular, we rode ahead and asked if there was anything we could do if we met with people in Bosnia. We were invited to come to the country, and we came with about 25 theology students. This was after the disaster of Srebrenica. We traveled by bus into Bosnia, the city of Zenica, where we were to meet with religious clerics. We gathered together on the front porch and were invited into the second floor of the mosque. And we said what we were up to. We were distinctly unwelcomed and asked to return to the front porch. And we tried to have a conversation about the war. One of the clerics turned to me and said, all we're really interested in is for somebody to say, I'm sorry. That cut like a knife through all of our pretensions. And once it fell upon me to express our sorrow over what had happened, we then were able to enter into conversation. This struck me as so important. I was reminded of a book by Donna Hicks called Dignity, and was reminded about the importance of extending human dignity to the community with which we were meeting. That's simply one of many illustrations that I raise in the book, Forgiveness and Reconciliation, Religion, Public Policy, and Conflict Transformation, where we talk about the terms of forgiveness.
That's an incredible story. And it illustrates the power of the words, I'm sorry. Sometimes these words are so hard to say, but they can have such an incredibly profound effect. And especially when working with groups, which kind of gets me to another question that I like to ask all of you, which is, what kinds of transformation have you seen happen with the population you're working with? Kinds of transformation. Leo, what have you seen?
Before I answer the question, I just want to recognize the social crisis that we are experiencing right now and how much anger is going to be, because there's going to be a lot of social trauma, a lot of family trauma with the violence, the lack of humanity that many people are experiencing. My community, my Latinx community, what is happening to kids, to children, when their parents are being taken away, detained in their presence. So all of those factors are going to be sources of big, deep trauma,
Right.
in our community, and it's going to affect everyone. Something that I see often in my work is that people who have been harmed develop anger and resentment. That those are common reactions of people when they feel harmed. And with what is happening. Going back to the question about the results that I have seen with my work, I have worked with the Latinx population mainly. I have done a lot of work as well with the Caucasian population. And in regards to the results that I have seen in people that sit down in these dialogues, in these group dialogues, are people gain an understanding about anger in general, about different types of anger. People that come to the circle learn a different perspective about anger and how it is manifesting in our own life, in our interaction with others, and in the way in which other people show their disappointments as well. People gain a deep understanding of the harm that they have received, but the harm that they have probably perpetuated on other people as well. And something else that I noticed is that people become very curious. They increase their interest in understanding people, in learning about people who harm them. People learn how to discern between what is an event, a situation, a person that represent a risk to my existence, and what are people that don't necessarily represent a risk to our life, but we may have distance ourselves from them in a way that really doesn't provide any protection, in a way that it may just hinder the situation. And even for some people, the practice of reconciliation develops once they know that there are some people that they have been distant from, but they don't possess any risk to their life. And then also there is the other part where sometimes one of the biggest factors that get in the way of people not forgiving or not reconciling are the harm, as I mentioned, the harm, and then not understanding the increased vulnerability that they may be in, or no. And we may encounter people that harm us, and then we may develop trust toward the person again, or depending on the circumstances, we may not develop the trust to become close with a person again. So it depends on many factors, but overall, understanding the harm that is caused, learning about the other person, and learning how to discern are key to the transformation that people go through in this process.
Dan, what are some of your thoughts? What kinds of transformations have you seen in your work? I would imagine with the gangs you might be working with and what you're seeing, it could be inspiring.
One of the first sessions we did down in the Mattapan, Roxbury area of greater Boston, the inner city areas, there was a mother there who, along with her teenage daughter, but her teenage daughter was paralyzed from the waist down because it was a stray bullet that had flown into the house and hit her and paralyzed her. There was a story of obvious anger and grief of the situation, but then eventually the mother visited the person in jail and developed a relationship with the person, almost like adding to a part of the family eventually level of relationship, that there was a true reintegration of this person back into civil society. We see countless stories like that. I remember two sisters that were always warring with each other, like even into like their adult age, and through taking the class found ways to interact with one another in a more civil way. Or a husband who found that he could be a better husband to his wife and told me about that. And so that was bringing in my scholarship in intimate partner and domestic violence within homes in a religious context as well in that particular scenario for my seminary training. Within schools, you might imagine some of the children were some of the most violent prone or gang affiliated that our programs would reach. And so we saw a sort of night and day transformation in taking the classes, the sort of modules that we did during the lunch hour or even after school programs. They were seen as leaders and looked up to and regarded and revered by their peers. Imagine these sort of tough gang members, right? And then they're now like king of the school kind of people, right? And so the teachers recognized this complete 180 that had happened. This is the Boston Public Schools that we were able to put this. Because like ESPERE, it's in 19 countries within Latin America and into North America here and some in Europe. Some people recognize that it needs to be ingrained within the school.
Well, when you think about why do kids join gangs, they want to have a sense of community. They want to have a sense of family. They want to have a sense
Exactly.
of belonging. They want to start feeling better about themselves. And Rodney, what kinds of transformations have you seen working with the population you're working with, or what did you see in terms of transformation in Bosnia?
Well, I've seen many changes in behavior in different countries around the world, Bosnia included. I remember visiting Northern Ireland, and while I was speaking through the fence, words of forgiveness altered the course of that struggle. Dan has spoken well about the different settings that we see work in schools, prisons, DYS, that's the Department of Youth Services. Different communities of people face the same problem of how to deal with anger that Leocadia spoke about so well.
How has this work changed your lives? Who wants to talk about that? I see a big smile out on Leo, so go for it, girl.
So since I took the training for the first time and I continued doing it there in that nonprofit, and as I continued doing it on my own, like it had become a big foundation of my work. And I think it taught me how to process disappointment in a compassionate way, in a very compassionate way. We're always being harmed by people, and
Right.
we're always harming others too. Sometimes it's hard to see because sometimes we just think about the harm that we are receiving. But yes, it had taught me how to process disappointment in a compassionate manner and always taking into account that the other people are experiencing their own harm and disappointment and trying to survive as well.
Thank you. How's it changed your life, Dan?
As we were talking about before with the philosophy or understanding the family dynamics and culture of gangs, I learned that from a young age, right? It's like what sort of like elementary school kid should be learning that. But it did give me a gift as well. It did allow me to understand violence and, that warrior culture in a different way versus like we just need to eradicate gangs and gangs are bad, right? No, gangs actually do come together to do other things in terms of sometimes helping one another or things of that line. So then once you sort of enter in with that, balanced, level-headed way, then that sort of opens up dialogue. But of course, I see the sort of gift that I was given from a young age that allowed me to see a more balanced point of view and to have the sense of mediation across difference.
One of the things that struck me as you were talking was that it really makes a big difference in how you view people before you start talking to them and with them. Instead of thinking that this group is really a terrorist group, we can be thinking this is a group with their own dynamics that really need to have voice, and we can really sit down and talk. So thank you for that, Dan. And Rodney, how has this work changed your life?
I think it's made me a much more patient person as I discern the needs of the other person. And let me mention again a book by Donna Hitt called Dignity. It's important to grant the other person a sense of dignity, so they feel included in the human race.
I think that word dignity is so important. And we'll definitely put that book in our show notes so people can find Donna Hicks' book. What would you like to leave the audience with? What message would you like to leave them with? Rodney, why don't we start with you?
What message I would like to leave the audience with?
Yeah.
You can do it.
That's a very important message. We can all learn how to forgive. Forgiveness is a skill, and we can all do it. Thank you for that. And Leo, what message would you like to leave the audience with?
Well, in doing this work, as a Black person, I do accentuate my Blackness and the reality of the exclusion that a lot of people experience, especially Black people. So I believe that with a process of inclusion and validation, everybody can learn how to forgive. And I hope that people will be willing to be in spaces to understand their hatred, if I can call it, their hatred and their violence to some people because of their immigration status, because of their race, because of their economic status, because of whatever identity some people have that may not fit in the frame of what is considered good citizens, good people. So that's my message. It goes really deep, as you can imagine. And I do believe in the power of forgiveness and reconciliation.
Thank you for those words.
Thank you.
These are powerful. And last but not least, Dan, what message would you like to leave the audience with?
Well, in 1999, Desmond Tutu published No Future Without Forgiveness. And I would say it's kind of where we're still at right now, that we really cannot move on, or we cannot heal, or we cannot build relationship or build the new until we find a way to sort of live here together, to find a way to forgive. It's in the central tenet in all our faiths, and even just morally, how can we just forgive and live here? I would say we should recognize no future without forgiveness.
Amen to that. That is definitely the message here. So I just really want to thank all of you for the work that you're doing in forgiveness and for the wonderful stories you shared today. And like you all said, and I think Rodney said it best, we can all do it. It's a skill and we can all do it. And all of you are wonderful trainers, and all of you are giving such gifts to people, which is the gift of forgiveness. And I also want to thank my audience for joining us and listening to Political Forgiveness, Voices of Peace, where I hope you were inspired by the stories that you heard involving the work of forgiveness in creating social change. And if you know of anyone who might find this episode helpful, please share it with them. And for more information on political forgiveness, visit my website, drboris.com, where you can find all the resources mentioned in this podcast, as well as sign up for the newsletter and the latest information on political forgiveness. And I just want to say that this has just been a wonderful first season. And I want to thank all my listeners for the responses that you not only gave to the podcast, but also to the monthly newsletter on political forgiveness. And, political forgiveness is about healing fractured relationships in our families, in our communities, in our societies, and within our nations. And this process begins with the individual. And so season 2 will focus on individual forgiveness, such as forgiving our spouses, or forgiving a family member, forgiving a friend, or forgiving someone who's betrayed us, and how we are able to forgive in our lives and how that forgiveness can change and have a social impact on the world at large. So stay tuned for season 2, which will begin in early spring. And that's it for now. Please stay in touch. Your comments are always welcome.